Needy, a podcast about compassionate communication and applied improv. Hello and welcome to the third episode of Needy. What's in it for you today? In the first episode, I told you that 10 years ago I found this book in my stepdad's bookshelf, and this book was also the first birthday present I ever gave to my girlfriend. That was 9 years ago, and I'm not saying that's the reason we are still together, but it helped. Today is all about introducing the model of nonviolent communication. And I have already mentioned it a few times, but never told you what it is really about. So first I will tell you something about the background of the model and Marshall Rosenberg himself. Then I will go into the basic assumptions of the model. And finally I will talk about the central idea of self-responsibility. So who was Marshall Rosenberg? Some kind of Gandhi? Well, given the large number of followers worldwide, some of them with a leaning towards being a little esoteric, one could easily come up with the idea that he was some kind of cult leader. Well, he wasn't, but he was a man with a mission. Rosenberg understood non-violent communication as a method to improve interpersonal relationships, and he was convinced that the way we speak plays a decisive role in our ability to remain empathetic with each other and the world around us. But was Rosenberg non-violent throughout his life? The answer is no. He actually has some kind of street credibility. He was born in 1934 in the US, and he was rather familiar with the violent side of men. His mother, a professional bowling and card player, worked in a milieu dominated by gangs, and she said to him things like, "You got to hit them first." So yeah, he learned quickly how to become physically assertive. He was a member in a boxing club and was expelled from school several times for fighting. In his biographical statements, he also describes anti-Semitic attacks, which he suffered from as well. And so there was this violent side, and on the other hand, there was a very caring atmosphere in his family. So in the house of the Rosenbergs, several people were sacrificially cared for by family members, and he speaks of his grandmother and uncle with great affection and deep respect for their humanity, for their way to communicate and act with each other. And he describes this contradiction between violence on the one hand and family love on the other hand as something that occupied him from a very early age and led him to reflect on the causes of violence. He decided not to go to an ashram in India, but to study psychology. And in 1961, he received his doctorate as a clinical psychologist. So the man actually has a scientific background, and his work in the beginning was influenced, among other sources, by the findings of his professor, Carl Rogers, and his client-centered talk therapy, which I already mentioned in the last episode. And yeah, certainly he was also influenced by Gandhi's thoughts on nonviolence, as so many people were in the 1960s. By the way, in contrast to Gandhi's reputation, he actually also had some very brutal views, mainly about the role of women, and yeah, some people say he was even a little racist, but yeah, this just as a side note. So we come back to Rosenberg. So he invented this method, and he became a practitioner after his studies. So in 1984, he founded the Center for Nonviolent Communication in Texas to make his ideas and approaches accessible for everyone who was interested. And for more than 3 decades, he offered his training seminars all over the world. And yeah, his concept is now being applied in families, schools, therapy, psychotherapy, and counseling, in organizations, companies, in all kind of negotiations, diplomatic negotiations and business negotiations. So his message was, if we want to live together more peacefully, we must learn to accept the imperfection of men in all people and especially in ourselves. So we will only become more tolerant of others if we are also more compassionate towards ourselves. That was, his main message. And imperfection, well, let us come to the basic assumptions of the model and take Rosenberg at this point at his word and keep a critical eye. He said himself that his method is far from being perfect. So the idea is not to become a kind of cultist, but to see what we can learn from this model and where it might not be thought through to the end. So yeah, let's come to the first basic assumption. We are all social animals. Of course, we all depend on each other. And Rosenberg added, and he is in a tradition of a lot of philosophers here who have more like an optimistic view about what humanity is about. We are social animals, and by our nature we are designed to be cooperative. We can find proofs of that cooperative capability anywhere. Just think of cooking together with friends and the great feeling at the dinner table when everyone is sitting together. However, you can also find proof for the opposite. Just turn on the news and think of the last argument you had with your friend or partner. Often it seems that everyone is just fighting for themselves. Well, some people argue that there is not such a thing like altruistic behavior. Even if we try and help others, we kind of do it for ourselves. Just seeing the joy on other people's faces is actually something, which fulfills you with joy as well. And, do I really always have the needs of others in mind? Of course not. I act selfishly, unconscious, not aware of actually what's really going on around myself. But I also say in a familiar environment where my needs are respected and I'm appreciated as a person, I'm also more willing to approach these people with more openness and empathy. So I don't know if you should call it a capability or a tendency. Rosenberg definitely would say tendency. But yeah, it might be limited to our family, it might be limited to our friends, maybe certain social groups. But surely we are capable of cooperating with each other. And the question is, when and why does this social attitude turn into a rather confrontational, seemingly antisocial attitude? So the second assumption is that, I said it already, that the way we speak plays a decisive role in our ability to remain empathetic. That was Rosenberg's conviction. So he was convinced that Language plays an important role in whether we create distance to people, including ourselves, or whether we create a basis for connection and affinity. He defines communication that creates distance as static language, which includes moral judgments and concepts such as guilt and shame, punishment and reward. Like, you didn't do the dishes, you lazy bastard. The problem here is that the person hearing this most likely feels like being put in a box. The same applies to our self-perception. For example, if I tell myself all the time, and I really believe that I'm not good enough, has some consequences. Just using the verb to be not only puts us in a box, it can also lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. And on the other hand, Rosenberg claims that nonviolent communication is a dynamic language. So in NVC, short for nonviolent communication, you don't say this person is lazy because there is no such thing as normal, abnormal, right, wrong, good or bad. And instead of judging our own and the behavior of others, non-violent communicators aim to face any concrete situation with an open attitude. How? Let's go to the third assumption, which is every human action aims to fulfill needs. The concept of needs is super crucial in nonviolent communication. And firstly, what is meant by needs? Needs are the motivation for our actions. So they describe pretty much why we do certain things. And people always want to fulfill their needs. In this sense, we always act selfishly, actually. And at the same time, we also have social needs. And I already said it, we also feel good when we do something good for others. So is there a need for not washing the dishes? Well, no. Rosenberg distinguishes between needs and strategies to have these needs met, right? So the need behind I'm going to have a bath instead of doing the dishes, for example, could be relaxation. The point is, not everyone likes to take baths. It's a strategy, right? An individual strategy. But everyone craves relaxation at some point. For another person, even washing dishes could be relaxing. Well, different person, different strategy. Relaxation, however, is something everyone can relate to, which leads us to the fourth assumption, which is that all people, regardless of gender, age, heritage, culture, faith, have the same needs. When we think about what all people need to survive or live, we actually describe needs. They connect us in a very basic way, and on this level, we are all equal. There are physical needs, for example. We all need to eat, sleep, feel safe. Then there are mental needs. Sometimes we like to be in a sheltered environment. Sometimes we are seeking for more autonomy. Other examples for needs are the more social ones, like recognition, trust, affiliation, understanding, or participating in something. There are also more spiritual needs like meaning, orientation, maybe even transcendence. Maybe you can think of more. There are certainly more, and just take your time, think about it, or better try to feel it. Can you remember a moment when you felt really happy, let's say last week. Famous quote from Rosenberg is, "Feelings are the children of needs." So when you ask yourself what made you happy, think about what general human need was fulfilled for you at that moment. So just pause the podcast for a moment and think about it. I hope you find a moment where you were happy, otherwise you would be probably quite depressed. Well, if you are, maybe just go backwards a little more and think of a moment where you were happy and what need was fulfilled for you. Right. So, welcome back to the episode. And what you just did is kind of self-reflect about the reason why you feel happy in a certain situations. And this is, another assumption that our feelings are like signposts. They point us to our fulfilled and unfulfilled needs. Unpleasant feelings point to unfilled needs. Pleasant feelings point to fulfilled needs. And of course, what needs are unfulfilled or fulfilled is different for each person. So it also depends on our current and concrete situation. And if on the one hand it means that we all have the same needs, the degree to which these needs are fulfilled is different for each of us. One last important basic assumption is that these needs are also not negotiable. They are basically set in stone. If we feel hungry, we need to eat at some point. We can wait and make us suffer for a little bit, but at some point we have to eat something. Otherwise we get sick and starve to death. So, right, I actually feel hungry right now, but before I start making myself some food, let me talk about an aspect in the Rosenberg model, which is actually often overlooked. The aspect of self-responsibility. At this point, I also refer to the last episode in which I talked about mindset, and that mindset is more important than the words which you say, which is often understood when people learn about nonviolent communication and start talking in kind of weird sentence structures and use weird words, and people just think, oh wow, what's that insane person, there's something not right. So the real key of this concept is that it assumes that we are responsible for everything that happens inside us, like feelings, needs, thoughts, and then the actions which result from these feelings, needs, and thoughts. In other words, the individual strategies we have adopted to meet our needs is our responsibility. So yes, we should and can take responsibility for all of this. Well, can we really always do that? For example, when we were children, we could think of a newborn child, for example, and how dependent it is on the outside world and the parents, and even older children are not yet fully developed enough to take full responsibilities for all their actions, all their desires and feelings. But as adults, at least this is the aspiration, we should take responsibility at some point. And there's also a demand from society to do this, right? It doesn't mean that every adult is capable to take the responsibility. But when you start learning more about yourself, when you learn how to self-reflect, you can become, some people would say more mature, more aware of what is really going on in you, so what's alive in you, and also what's alive in others. And that's why nonviolent communication takes this responsibility, self-responsibility thing so serious. And there's another reason it takes it so serious, because if we fulfill our needs more consciously, the immediate consequence is then that you point less with the finger at others. So you probably stop, or at least the number of times where you blame other people will definitely decrease, because you somehow think, okay, what's actually my game here? What's going on in me first? And does this really have to do anything with the other person in this moment? And most likely it doesn't, first of all. So when it's me who is responsible, not my boss or my partner, for the feelings and thoughts I have, the main hypothesis of the whole Rosenberg model is then that I automatically behave more peaceful, non-violent, because I just don't longer blame others for my misery. And I mean, that's actually pretty intense, I think, especially when you hear it the first time, because it's easy, right? Just to blame others for your fate, the system, the people around you. And it doesn't mean that you can't criticize people anymore or criticize the system. It just means that you are conscious about what's going on in you, and maybe you are suppressed by a system or by a certain person. But the method suggests that you first look on yourself and kind of check if your assumptions on the world are actually going the right path, let's say. And I mean, that's very difficult, and I don't know anybody who is 100% equipped with this kind of empathetic, non-violent mindset. It's not that simple to take responsibility, and that's why this model should be seen more as an orientation, and it gives you terms to help you become more aware of many types of your habits, of your patterns, really. And what it really does is supporting a learning process, so to speak, the process of growing up, actually. I think that's it for today. If you have any questions about the topics discussed, please write to me. You can find me on several social networks, and if you like the podcast and you want to support me, you're also welcome to do so. On my website, you can find a donation button. And I'm looking forward to next week. We will look at the famous 4 steps of nonviolent communication in a playful way. And I look forward to having you join again. And until then, take care, Jakob.